appreciate being invited to speak here, and this is an awesome facility. And I'm going to do part of my presentation is standing here, and then I have some slides that I'll show towards the end. I want to talk about a relatively under-discussed part of the project, which is light rail. It seems to be accepted in the conversation of, oh yeah, CRC, it's got light rail, blah, 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 and no one actually goes back to talk about that. In fact, I was watching on the House floor today where wasn't a debate exactly, there was some theater going on as the Oregon House of Representatives voted to go ahead and finance or approve their portion of it. And I listened to most of the testimony I was watching on my computer screen in Portland. And I didn't hear anybody actually talk about the light rail part of it, except for some money that they're going to get. So I just want to say that my role here in the panel, and I'm fortunate that Joe and Tiffany are going to have all kinds of numbers that they're going to use for the broader project. I just want to talk about this one piece, and my perspective is as a lifelong transit rider. Certainly I am an analyst, and I have 35 years experience doing this, but when I approach a project like this, I look at it from the standpoint of just someone who wants to go somewhere, not in a car, and how is this going to work for commuters, for shoppers, or students. And I grew up 20 miles outside New York City in North Jersey, and I have very fond memories of taking the train, the Yankee Stadium, the Shea Stadium, and the bus into the city. And my first real job out of college was working in Manhattan, and I commuted on a commuter rail from New Jersey to New York for 3 years. So when it comes to the light rail portion of this, I'm a wannabe supporter. I would like it to work. Unfortunately, it's not going to work. It's not going to work at any cost, and the costs are considerable. I like trains enough that I actually bought a house out on the east side of Portland in 1995 because I wanted to be a rail commuter again, and there only was one train at the time, and that was to the east side. So I commuted on it many hundreds of times, and then after that, I started to become a rail critic, a light rail critic, instead of a supporter, because, you know, when you're sitting day after day traveling about 15 miles an hour, you have a lot of time to think about why this isn't working out the way you thought it might. This isn't like my commuter rail into New Jersey. It's not like the subway system in New York. It's not like BART. It's not like the Washington, D.C. subway, all of which I enjoy riding. No, it's just light rail. It's got almost all the costs of heavy rail and none of the benefits. So, in fact, at one point, and I want to put this in the context of what you already have here, the Z-Tran Express buses into Portland. Now, years ago, it must have been 96 or 97, someone was harassing me about why I keep taking the slow train from all the way to the end of Gresham, all the way to downtown, creeping along, when I could get off at the Gateway Transit Center and take an express bus from Z-Tran that would come over the I-205 bridge, stop at Gateway, and then get back on I-84 and go downtown nonstop. And I'm a creature of habit, so I didn't really pay any attention to this until this friend harassed me enough that I finally got off light rail one day and got on at Gateway and found the Z-Tran bus and got on it. And back in those days, light rail also wasn't air conditioned. So this is in June, it's pretty hot. And I get on the Z-Tran bus and we pull away heading to Portland, and it has massive air conditioning, like refrigerator style air conditioning, and tinted windows, and better seats, and we get on 84, and we just go downtown. I don't have to stop every 20 blocks and listen to a recording about the doors are closing in different languages over and over and over again. And even with traffic, I beat the train downtown. I remember saying to myself right then, John, you are experiencing the proverbial paradigm shift right here. Who knew? And ever since then, I thought, you know, people who keep saying the train is some kind of magic pixie dust, and the only way you can get upscale suburbanites to take transit is to give them light rail, they simply, obviously, have never actually been transit riders, and they haven't taken the C-Trans Express buses, which are so superior. Well, unfortunately, after the red line opened, C-Tran was kicked out of Gateway, so they don't stop there anymore. So I stopped doing that. And so as this project advanced forward, and I've been following this project for 17 years, I've testified on CRC many, many times in 2 different states, in different venues, with all of the usual fake public involvement stuff that they specialize in Portland, where they pretend to be listening, but of course they're not really. And so I've tried to understand the rationale for this. I keep saying to people, have you ever actually taken the C-Tran Express buses? Because you already have them. They're paid for by people in Vancouver. There's no risk to us south of the river. They work great. So what exactly is the problem we're trying to solve here? I don't get this. So I brought 80 copies of something today, and I see apparently there's more than 80 people here, which is great. I'll refer to these. You don't have to have these because I will summarize them briefly. But what I did pass out to people is a breakdown, a comparison of 5 key attributes, CRC versus the express bus we already have. The first is capital cost expansion. So the light rail they're proposing is somewhere around 932, 944, I think is the number Joe had, $1 million for a 2.9 mile extension of the yellow line. On the express bus side of the ledger, the capital cost expansion is 0. You're already running them. Of course, in the future, you'll need an occasional new bus, but that's all built into the long-range plan. But tomorrow morning, if you want to take an express bus to Portland, at the margin, capital cost of the train is almost $1 billion, and the cost of the current service from C-Tran is 0. Wow. Okay. That's a really big advantage to what you already have. All right. Operating cost per hour. The yellow line, most people don't know this, but TriMet likes to give you a generic value for how their light rail works. But actually, the yellow line is their least efficient line. If you make enough inquiries, you can get numbers by line. So the operating cost is $270 per hour, and the operating cost for the C-Tran Express bus is $110 per hour. Okay, 270, 110. Score. 2 for C-Tran, 0 for TriMet. The fare box recovery ratio. That's an important metric. People like to know how much money to operate these things comes from the people who actually use them. Again, the yellow line is the least productive of TriMet's lines. They get a fare box recovery of 47%. So 47% of operating costs come from actual users. C-Tran has a premium fare for their express buses because they offer a premium service. And apparently people are willing to pay because they get between 66 and 68% cost recovery from users. 47%, 67%. Peak hour frequency. Well, the peak hour frequency is pretty much the same as the off-peak at the yellow line. Once every 15 minutes. For the express buses, it ranges depending on which bus you take and what you call peak hours, but it's between every 10 and every 15 minutes. And I should point out that when TriMet received or signed for a full funding grant agreement with the feds, they promised that they would run trains every 10 minutes at the peak, and then every 15 at the off-peak, and then eventually by 2020, every 7.5 minutes at the peak. Well, on opening day, when the ribbon cutting was there and some bureaucrat from FTA was in town, yes, they operated it every 10 minutes. And that quickly evaporated, now it's every 15 minutes. They've already broken their promise, they're already out of compliance with their full funding grant agreement, which requires them to operate the train as promised for 20 years. The last is the AM peak hour speed. Well, it doesn't matter with the light rail whether it's peak or non-peak. It's just 15 miles per hour all the time, because notwithstanding the name, Metropolitan Area Express, that's what MAX stands for, in case you didn't know that. There is no express in the express. Now, I'm a serious transit customer. So when you tell me express or local, those words mean something to me. TriMet, they picked Max because they had a contest for a name, and some sixth grader or something picked Max, and they thought it sounded like a cool name. That's called an area express, but it's all local. Okay, whereas the buses, C-Tran, depends again on which route you take, they average between 31 and 45 miles per hour. 15, 31, 45. Okay, the score there is 5-0. Express buses versus light rail. Again, the problem we're trying to solve here is what exactly? I literally don't get it. Now, I didn't quite realize all this for the first 10 years of the project, but then when the EIS file got published and I started to bore into it, I was really shocked. I thought, if you've known all this should have been a deal breaker a long, long time ago. This should have been taken right off the table. Also on this blue sheet I have some cost comparisons, because when people say, well, the price is X, if you're not in the business, that number doesn't mean anything unless you know, well, compared to what? So on a per mile basis, the CRC would be the most expensive rail project ever built by TriMet. It would be about $321 million per mile capital cost, beating their new record being currently set on the Milwaukee, well, they call it a light rail project, but it's actually, now that I'm beginning to understand why it's so expensive, it's actually a monorail project. Almost the whole thing is elevated. So the Milwaukee project is about $211 million a mile. The yellow line on North Interstate was $74 million a mile adjusted for inflation. The red line was $30 million a mile. The Emerald Express Rapid Transit, not Rapid Transit, well, they call it bus rapid transit, it's not really, but it has its own right-of-way down in Eugene. It's pretty popular down there. It's overpriced for Eugene, but it was only $6 million a mile. That's a bargain. And the project that I like the most, probably in the whole country, is what's called the Metro Rapid Express bus system in Los Angeles that covers 370 miles of service, is now 12 to 13 years old, and was built for $335,000 per mile capital cost. LA is a very big time transit entity. They've tried everything. And the best that they have is sweet spot between low capital cost, low operating cost, high speed, $335,000 per mile. Light rail to Vancouver, $321 million per mile. Keep that in mind. All right, now, oddly enough, few people seem to remember that 10 years ago when the head of TriMet was down in Salem asking for an increase in the payroll tax rate, which is their cash cow. More than half of their operating revenue comes from non-users. It comes from a payroll tax. So Fred Hansen was going around making the whole spiel, saying you have to give us more money because, quote, in order to meet the operations requirement, you run these trains for 20 years, operations requirement for federal funding support, TriMet will need to demonstrate its ability to increase revenue in the years ahead. So they asked for this support. And he's very persuasive. And there were 4 hearings on the bill, and in all 4 hearings I opposed that, and of course all 4 times it got crushed, and the bill passed, and there was a signing ceremony, and they got lots of money, and in the next 8 years, their operating revenue went up 51%, their all-funds budget went up 125%, and their service, their actual service levels of miles, revenue miles of transit, declined by 14%. It's a bureaucratic miracle. Money goes in, and nothing comes out. It's amazing. So they said then, and actually it was repeated in 2009 when he did the same dog and pony show, and got the same approval for payroll tax rate increase, so we'll raise rates probably every year to 2024 for people who pay the payroll tax. Got his approval, and service has declined. Well, on top of that, just 10 days ago, the TriMet general manager had a briefing for his board in which he basically admitted they're in a total free fall. They're going broke. And when I saw this PowerPoint, which you can get off their website, I imagine one of these Buddhist monks who douses himself with gasoline and then lights a match. I thought, seriously? You're just saying on the PowerPoint presentation that you have no future. This is a graph that they have, and this is their expenses up here and the revenues here because they have the most costly workforce in the entire industry. Their, as of now, their fringe benefits equal about 156% of wages, if you can imagine such a number. And what he told his board is, within about 3 years, they will be having, they've already cut service 5 times in the last 5 years, 4 years. Before the CRC is even open for business, they'll be cutting about 49 bus lines and have a major service crisis. Essentially, they will not be a transit agency anymore. They'll just take money in and then send it out to retirees and healthcare providers. All the vehicles will be up on blocks in the front yard, and they'll just have checks come in and go out. So, okay, you just admitted you can't solve the problem, and the union, they have no leverage over their union. They have 2,000 union members, and I don't know if you've ever watched public sector negotiations between a monopoly board like the school board and a labor cartel, which is what the ATU is, but they're very sophisticated. Basically, management says, well, we'd like you to make some concessions, and the union thinks about it and says, no. And then these highly paid negotiators say the same thing again in some other way, and the other guy says, no. And this goes on for years. And they all get paid a lot of money to do this. And that's what happens. They have no leverage. They will completely go down in flames. They've now admitted it. They have no future. So, to me, they are categorically ineligible to receive 1 penny from FTA for this project. And yet, all the mouthpieces for it keep saying, we have to submit this now because we get $850 million from FTA for this project. Well, either Fred Hansen was lying 10 years ago when he said we have to have 20 years of operating, or someone's lying today. Pick either one, but it doesn't work. In addition to the fact that since the project costs about $940 million, and you might get $850, the notion that you have to get this because it helps you out so much, there's still $90 million there. Someone has to pay for that. I mean, that's like saying you're going to go out, rush out, and buy manual typewriters for all people in your office. And someone would say, why do you do that? Because we get them 75% off. We have to get them. But no one wants to use them. But they're on sale. Really, this is what we're getting from the CRC crowd. So, to me, the notion that this is going to work, what doesn't work from a transit provider standpoint, it doesn't work from a finance standpoint, and now I'll show some slides and then I'll wrap up, which is that if you actually do get this, this is the kind of thing you also have to look out for, which is all the private property and eminent domain that they're going to utilize to get it done. That's that little sign for the Milwaukee Light Rail project. And that was a really lovely, quiet street that had bus service on it. And all those trees were planted as part of an urban renewal project about 50 years ago. This is right near the Portland State campus on Lincoln Street. And I took these about two years ago, just before the TriMet death machine showed up. But, you know, the bus service there, which they ran, it wasn't deemed to be good enough. And all these trees got in the way of their plan, so we had to start cutting them and cut some more. Oh, no, that's a really big improvement. That's awesome. Yeah, that really helps out the local citizens. And then there was a popular pub right next to the Portland State campus, but that was in the way of the train. It wasn't in the way of the bus, but had to come down. Of course, once they take possession of it, there's no trespassing. And then it's gone. At the other end of the street, this is also on Lincoln Street, there was a radio station, and now it's gone. And this is over on 17th Street, which is where TriMet's headquarters used to be. And there's a number of these buildings where they just say, well, we're gone now. This is a popular restaurant. I've been there for about 50 years, as well as some other things in this little mall in southeast Portland. And I went there one day and they were boarding the place up, and all are gone. Another sign saying that they're gone. I mean, they are taking a total of about 100 properties in this, to this Milwaukee monorail. This happens to be a streetcar picture of the goofy East Side streetcar that just opened, but see a lot of traffic impacts while you're watching all this. And then I have 2 more slides just to show you that if you're wondering, after all the destruction and construction is done, what it's going to look like. I mean, different stations for TriMet look differently, and they redid one on the East Side line out in Rockwood, which hasn't ever fared too well out there. It's 26 years after they built it. And they decided maybe they could make it work better if they did a whole redesign of the station. So they had a public involvement thing, and I went out there and I talked to them, and they brought in their top people, and they finished it, and they had a grand opening a year and a half ago. And this is what it looks like today. The train and, I don't know, whatever that thing is. I don't know if it's a scared porcupine or a peacock on steroids. And so wow, this is going to make Rockwood really a happening place. This is going to be great for property values. But a lot of people want to take the train down. And, I don't get it, but I think you should just have this image burned in your brain that, this is not some artifact of the psychedelic 60s or the 70s when, Jack Ramsey was prowling the Blazer sideline in his glow-in-the-dark checked pants. Okay, this is 2012. Okay, this is the best and the brightest of the TriMet consultants. So just be careful what you wish for. I'd say, look, I think actually pretty highly of C-Trans. They have no long-term bond debt. They don't even have a credit rating. They've never sold bonds. They just run a bus company, and they do it pretty well. Why would you want